Hello and welcome to another episode of Swish Money Live. My name is Jeff Welpley. I'm your host today, the CTO of Swish.com. And we have a very special episode that we're going to get into today, talking about how you can pay your bills using an awesome company that I just love the idea behind this and really looking forward to kind of getting into it, a company called Plastiq. And we are lucky enough to have the CEO and founder of Plastiq here today with me, Eliot Buchanan. Say hi, Eliot.
Hey guys, hey Jeff, thanks for having me. Really excited to chat and tell a little bit more about Plastiq. We do have some people pronouncing it Plastiq, but up to the customer. But Plastiq is how it was originally formed. But we do get that a lot.
You know, I've been saying that to Christian like for the past 3 days, and he has never corrected me. That is,
well, we'll blame him.
Okay, yes, that is exactly what I am doing. Okay, so let's dive right into it. And actually, really quickly, why don't you give a brief introduction to yourself and who you are?
Sure. It'll be fairly brief. I haven't been around too long. So, grew up in Canada, Edmonton, Alberta, Western Canada, born and raised there, and had the good fortune of coming to the U.S. for school. So I ended up in Boston. Somehow Harvard decided to admit me. Still not sure exactly why, but hopefully we'll answer that one day. So spent 4 years at Harvard as an undergrad, playing around, toying around with a lot of different areas. Being the liberal arts school that it is, I think it gives a broad approach to various disciplines. And like many students, I think I had no idea what I wanted to do or who I wanted to be, and I think was focused instead on problems that I thought were interesting to solve, and people I wanted to solve them with. So whether that be influenced by my roommates, or I was also on the squash team, so other former teammates and fellow athletes, etc. But surrounding myself with interesting people, interesting problems, less focused on the exact degree or who I wanted to become, and was fortunate to form the roots of what is now Plastiq early on at Harvard, and here we are. It's my first job, maybe my last job, not sure yet.
Yeah, and actually, that's one thing. So we have a mutual friend, my co-founder of Get Human and Swish, Christian Allen. Used to work with you on some of the earlier stuff that you had done. And one of the things that he mentioned was just how hard of a worker you were and how business focused you were, even in college, which is, I remember in college, I thought about anything, actually running a company or doing something like that. And I believe that even as early as like high school, is that right? That you were doing some of the payment stuff, some of the early stuff that eventually would become the idea for Plastiq.
Yeah, that's generous of Christian to say, but not exactly sure where all of my my tendency to work so hard came from. But I think it was more rooted in just, again, finding interesting, fascinating problems, taking risks, etc. And it started well before high school. I actually back in the days when eBay came out, I had one of my first. I won't call it a business, that's taking myself too seriously, but one of my first sort of entrepreneurial projects, if you will, when I was about 9 or 10 years old, somewhere in there, and formed my first eBay business. You weren't allowed to have an eBay account unless you were like 18, but I formed one anyway. And at that time was actually when plasma screens, this might be, for those of us who have been around a while, plasma screens first came out, and they were like $20,000 for a new 42-inch plasma. And I saw an opportunity to disrupt that. So I formed a deal with a Chinese drop shipper to buy them in bulk, sold them around the world. At one point thought I was, the wealthiest 9-year-old around, and then, made some money, lost some money. And just, again, it wasn't about electronics. It was just, my fascination with trying things that, maybe didn't make sense to others, or observing problems that, others didn't observe. So started then, and then into high school, the early roots of a few other ideas started to form. But frankly, I was more focused on my studies, and I was kind of a nerd. Admittedly, didn't have a lot of outside interests apart from school, and that took me to Harvard, where kind of my world was opened up in terms of, frankly, just what's possible, and people far smarter than myself, which is, I think, a theme I continue to try to emphasize in any idea or now business I'm working on, is, hire the absolute best people. And that's the main factor that makes or breaks companies at the end of the day. So always had entrepreneurial roots, was lucky to meet Christian while I was a student, and could say the same about him. Again, surrounding myself with people like him and others who have witnessed success or witnessed, pattern recognition, as I call it, around how things get made and how things grow.
Yeah, I mean, I 1,000% agree with that sentiment. I think it's especially important as early as you were in your career, getting into something where you obviously have always had, great skill and foresight and kind of ability there, but there's always going to be stuff that you don't know. When you kind of focus on surrounding yourself with smart people, that just helps kind of bridge those gaps where you're still trying to get into certain areas and learn certain things about the business. So totally makes sense. So let's get into the business. Let's talk about Plastiq, and really quick, give me the kind of quick elevator pitch for what Plastiq is.
Sure, absolutely. So very simply, Plastiq allows you to use your preferred credit cards for essentially any large bill or any of life's major payments where you can't use your credit card today. So as a consumer, a classic sort of, our most important payments like rent or tuition is where the roots started, obviously, while I was a student, or things like taxes or car payments, insurance, et cetera. And then also as small business owners, which we can talk about, we're also seeing using us for their bills and their vendors. So, their lease or their rent, or paying their suppliers for, their inventory, et cetera, where today they can't use their credit card, but where they actually would prefer to do so.
So it seems like and I mean, that is an amazing idea. I don't think I've heard of someone doing that before. It seems like the primary use cases, which you started to talk about, are either if you don't have cash on hand and you want to pay some of these bigger bills that you aren't able to normally pay with your credit card, or if you're trying to kind of just exploit the credit card rewards programs. Is that sort of the two use cases, or are there other things as well?
Yeah, great. Fantastic question. So I probably want to highlight a couple different examples. And frankly, the first was my own use case when I started. And I knew nothing at all about payments, and frankly, still learning every day. It's a complex ecosystem. But when I started, Jeff, I actually was trying to build credit. So as a Canadian, I had a social security number and a credit score of 0 because I just came to the U.S. And obviously credit conceptually being so, pretty important in this country and many countries to, building and growing, your career and your life. And my use case was, I thought, well, I could open my first credit card, put my largest expense, which not shockingly, and probably true for many of us at that age, happened to be the part of tuition that I did pay. And I was simply told that I couldn't do so. And that's sort of what seeded the entire idea. But that was a use case that is probably not everyone's use case today, but we do see people, especially younger generations, who like to put some expenses to build credit and get that credit authority and get their credit score up as one. But the dominant use cases as we have evolved, again, one of our themes is, let the business go where our customers take us. And our customers have taken us a few different directions. One is, customers who prefer, collecting miles and rewards, right? And this is a theme with a lot of the new rewards cards coming out where people have minimum spend bonuses they need to hit. And so that's definitely a demographic. And the other one is, people who simply prefer, the security, the convenience of credit, right? There was a Fed study, I think it was 2012 or 2013, I can't remember, I can look at it after, that ranked, Americans' payment preferences in order. And cash is still stronger than most people thought, but credit, actually, not too surprisingly, was by far and away number one. And so people prefer the convenience and security of credit. And then lastly, you mentioned sort of flexibility, right? The ability to buy time on important payments, especially when, and this is true for small business, which is our fastest growing segment, when you have large vendors and bills that you need to pay, and you're waiting on accounts receivable. So that's a combination, all rooted in the main elements of a credit card, right? Which is security, rewards, convenience, float.
Yeah, actually, that's super interesting because, first of all, I did not even think about the credit, like building credit history, and that totally makes sense. I didn't even think about that. I also like the idea of, because we talk a lot about budgeting on this show. And one thing that I don't think people necessarily get unless they do run a small business is that idea of float, and that idea of, that there is a gap between when you receive money and then when you need to pay it out. And there's
Exactly.
value to be able to normalize that in some way.
Yep.
And I wasn't even thinking about that as well, but like just on a treating your personal budget like businesses do, that's like hugely valuable as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that our value is we want people to bring whatever bills they think they should put on credit, and for some people that doesn't mean every bill or all bills, right? I mean, it's prioritizing what's most important and based on the factors that each individual needs in a given time. But I think what makes us, amongst several factors, probably pretty unique is we can truly allow you to pay almost all of your bills. There's never a question of whether you can't use Plastiq. You always can.
Curious, actually, before we dive into some of the details of how that works, with credit rewards programs, because this is something that a lot of people don't understand how it works necessarily. Like, can you kind of explain a little bit, like why do credit rewards programs exist in the first place? How are credit companies able to do this, and have you seen them evolve over time, like how they work?
Yeah, sure. So why they exist in the first place? It's actually we don't probably have enough time to dive into too much detail, but it's one of the most, I tell people this all the time, one of the most successful and sticky, I'll call it, sort of products or features, whatever one you want to call it, whether it's the credit card and or the loyalty programs associated with it. And it does not exist in many other parts of the world, right? America, sort of the US is really where it's concentrated. Parts of Europe, parts of Canada, but elsewhere, the concept of loyalty points is less prevalent, and it's essentially a reward system that's funded, if you will, by the merchants, right? So when you and I go and shop online, whether it's at Amazon or in retail shops or restaurants, typical categories for everyday spend, we are getting that the cash back or the rewards miles that we want, and that's essentially being paid for and funded by the merchant that we are paying, we are shopping at, and that's where they are paying typically, obviously a fee to accept our credit cards. And so over time, if you look at the history, consumers have gotten fairly addicted to credit, but also these loyalty systems, and they've become more competitive. So if you actually look at the value of rewards, I think there's two trends to highlight. One is consumers have asked banks, if you will, for more transparency, right? Transparency in our financial system being a broader a theme over the last few years, at least desired by consumers. And with that, you see more cashback cards, because cash is easier for you and I to value, right? Versus points are a little more subjective. But even on the points front, you've seen a whole new host of premium, higher, richer reward systems come out. So a classic example, a lot of press last fall, was the Chase Sapphire Reserve card, right? Which is sort of one of the main competitors to American Express, which historically has dominated that market. You're seeing more of these programs come out, and actually, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but on one of the earnings calls for JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon was asked about that card because they spent a fairly sizable sum. I can't remember the exact figure, but 9 or 10 figures to fund the rewards program. And he they sort of asked, "Hey, are you sure this was worthwhile? Like, are these customers sticky?" And he said he would launch it again in a heartbeat. And so it's really highlighting the bank's desires to keep all these, millennials especially, and other customers, premium customers, sticky and loyal to their systems. And that involves an ever-growing set of reward systems. And so rewards have actually gotten more valuable over the last 7 or 8 years if you chart it on an actual graph.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I guess the main point there is that if you don't have like a good rewards program, like there are a lot of good ones out there, and you should
more than ever.
Yeah, you should work the market. See, like the Chase Sapphire one, I did notice that last year for sure, and there's a lot of them out there. I use actually the JetBlue one, which is pretty good. So that's cool, definitely. Okay, let's dive a little bit into like the details, and specifically, actually, I'm wondering, obviously, Plastiq gets a cut when people are paying the larger bills to these companies. So how do the economics of that, work out in such a way? Because do the economics work for every payment, every type of payment, or is it only like once it reaches a certain threshold where whatever fee you take out is becomes worthwhile?
Sure, great question. Generally, every payment, we are a business, and so it's consistently profitable. But every payment type and every type of card used comes with a different cost. So the way to think about it is no different than any other merchant, right? We are a merchant ourselves, right? And so we have a cost, which is we connect to the major card networks: Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Discover, etc. And with that comes a price that we pay. Not much different than when you and I go again to our average local merchant, etc., where they themselves have a cost that they are paying. And so based on that, obviously we charge a little bit more than that, and we make revenue, and that's our profit margin. That margin can be more or less profitable depending on like you say, the types of payments being done, and also the types of cards being used, whether it's a basic rewards card or a premium rewards card like the Chase Sapphire Reserve, etc. But for customer transparency and simplicity, we almost always like to charge one rate, right? Which we charge that 2.5%. That's our fee for all cards equally, etc.
And okay, so it's the same thing for everything kind of like normalized. I did notice that if you are a company, that I think I saw on your website that you can sign up for some services there. What do you do on the company side? Is there some way that you work with them to make this easier?
Yeah, sure. So for if you're specifically referring to small businesses, which is a really interesting segment,
right?
Similar concept. Again, the same problem we're solving, where the small businesses have a preference to use credit and use their cards. However, a lot of the largest bills that they pay are areas where cards are not accepted. And today they would send a wire or an ACH or pay the vendor via other means. So it's conceptually similar to the original problem I was solving when I was a student paying tuition, except obviously different verticals, different industries. However, for small businesses, obviously they have different needs in terms of what they expect from a product, right? Speaking of product, than you and I do as an average consumer, right? So for you and I, we might be okay if the vendor, if our landlord gets paid, let's say via a check, because he or she is used to getting paid that way. In the B2B world, our customers obviously, rightfully so, often want more electronic options. They want payments there faster. They expect a higher concierge level of service, and so we offer just different types of customer service experiences for those customers. But fundamentally, we have this sort of rallying cry this year for our product, which is one Plastiq, right? And what that means is whether you're a consumer, whether you're a small business, you experience Plastiq via the same the same login, the same account. One really interesting pattern we're seeing, Jeff, is and frankly how we kind of came across small businesses as a use case, as a target audience, that is a lot of small businesses obviously started with us as consumers, and they remain consumers. And by that I mean they have household bills they want to pay, their rent or their car payment or their tuition, but then they also are a small business owner. So we want to deliver a singular, consistent, unique experience, no matter what persona that customer is.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense for small businesses. I wonder if somebody, whether it is a individual or a business, if they do carry a certain amount of debt, like ongoing, credit card debt, does this actually hurt them, from the sense that if you're incentivizing them or trying to incentivize them or make the appearance that you're benefiting by kind of putting more stuff on the credit card, would you advise somebody who let's say an individual in this case, would you advise somebody who does have a non-insignificant amount of credit card debt to not use Plastiq?
Yeah, great, fantastic question, and part of a broader sort of national conversation that we all need to be thoughtful about. In our case, I think there's a couple of points where people that have higher existing debt either don't use us or use us in different ways. And let me expand on both of those. So when I say don't use us, what I mean by that is we have this really interesting sort of almost structural limitation that's outside of our control, but in this case is, I think, healthy for the problem you're mentioning around debt, which is we don't lend money ourselves, and we can't override, let's say, existing card limits. And so what you typically see with the problem around, let's say, student debt is you have a lot of, and I'm not an expert, but you have a lot of lenders that are probably lending to individuals or relending in ways that are probably unhealthy and ones that I certainly wouldn't, and many people don't agree with. But in the card space, credit cards specifically, credit cards obviously have a predefined limit, and what we see is a lot of these customers don't have the limits, nor should they, frankly, to support what we focus on, which is high ticket, right? High transaction size. And so what we actually will see is if someone that's in a bad situation even wants to attempt using this, which we would advise against, to get to your question, they will basically almost always get declined, because we will take that transaction. The credit card issuer on the other side will say to us essentially, hey, this transaction can't go through, and we tell the customer they can't make that payment in real time. That's number one. Number two, I said they use us in different ways, and this really gets to our focus for that target market, which is debit. So amongst millennials, debit cards are certainly more popular than other demographics. Even on small business owners' side, we have some small businesses who prefer to put some of their bills on credit card, right? But they also prefer to have everything in one place, and they might want some of them directly linked to their bank account. Well, guess what? Debit card, Visa and MasterCard debit cards are a super convenient experience and way to directly fund from your bank account. And of course, there's no debt because it's not a credit line. And so we encourage folks also to use us and use the convenience that we offer from a debit perspective, if that's the product that best serves them.
That's great. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So what does the future hold? Where are you guys going from here? Well, I know it's a broad question. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff you're thinking about, but what are some of the stuff that's like kind of front of mind that you can talk about?
Yeah. I mean, retirement? No, I'm kidding. If you asked me this question 5 years ago, I probably wouldn't have been too strong of idea, or certainly, we're in a very different place than I would have thought, and in many ways, in many good ways, right? Just in terms of how far I think our vision has come in a pretty complex ecosystem, and the team we've been able to, and that myself and my co-founder have been fortunate to sort of surround ourselves with, et cetera. I mentioned earlier on that thematically we like to let our business go where our customers take us, and that it may sound sort of high level and thematic, but it's true. If you think about you asked a question on the value prop, and my first value prop was credit based, right? It wasn't rewards and flexibility, float, convenience, even though those are now the dominant use cases, right? And that's because customers would reach out and say, hey, this is why we're using it, and we'd say, oh, let's adapt the product there. Similarly, if you think about the verticals we focus on, tuition was the roots of the company, and yet we evolved very quickly to focus more on recurring industries, right? Set it and forget it. Hence, rent, being a big category, and that I can't claim credit for that. That's not my idea. That's our customer's idea. And then lastly, bringing us to today, and then tying that as we think about the future, this focus on small business that we're super excited about, because there's a great narrative to supporting the lifeblood of the United States, which is small business, and empowering them to with the flexibility to grow their business and pay the way they want. So that's not something I can claim credit to, sitting in a room and whiteboarding that idea. That's driven by our customers. And so I think we'll see a similar pattern over the next few years at least, and you'll see a lot of announcements from us probably over the next few quarters and a few years, all around enabling and empowering small business. And then then there's a question of the global market, and I think that's closer to 3 to 5 years out. I mean, some companies want to take over the world very quickly, and I think while aspirational, it's less realistic. We want to really understand the small business market here in the U.S., but it's obviously one that's applicable to other markets. And probably once or twice a month I get an inbound email from, whether it's an overseas investor or an overseas vendor or a partner, from the likes of, a few weeks ago, one from China and India, another one from Australia a few months back. There's certainly aspirations there, but again, won't rush it. Want to wait to see where our customers take us.
Well, I got to say, I am amazed by what you've been able to build. I mean, it is really great, especially being in the trenches myself, kind of building a company, seeing a lot of other stuff kind of with a lot of promise succeed and fail. I think it's a great idea, and just seeing the type of traction that you have and kind of where you're going is really special. So kudos on all of that.
Well, it's a lot of luck, as they say.
Yeah, no, so that's great. So I use Plastiq myself, and I am definitely going to be using it for our business as well after this conversation. Start looking at that. So it's cool to
Let's get you on board.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay, great. That is super helpful. And let's wrap up with our picks. I don't know if you saw this, but we usually do like just random any link or anything you want to promote that we didn't already talk about. You can kind of like throw it out there, and we'll include all the actual links in the show notes. Anything that you want to pick?
Sure. I briefly saw your thing on, a good book or cat videos. So unfortunately, I'm allergic to cats. So no videos to share, and don't have too much of a, being an entrepreneur, can't admit to having too much of a interest or life outside of work. But such is the case. One theme, and I'll just leave it there. I've been thinking, a lot about both. Frankly, philosophically, as we think about our company and how we focus and amidst all the opportunities, as well as like personally, something I've been thinking about, because running at a hard pace is only sustainable for so long. It's a project, and there's a book on it called onesquareinch.org, and it's all about power of silence. It's worth looking up. It's a book, it's a project, it's a foundation. I came across it through an article in the Atlantic, I believe. I'll have to double check that, but it's all about, silence is not the absence of something, but the presence of everything, so to speak, to quote the author. And it's frankly something I've been thinking about and symbolic of internally here. We've tried to focus and prioritize, and it's a big theme around how do we get rid of all the noise and the distractions, whether competitive or product wise or et cetera, and listen to the very few things that matter. And also on a personal level, it's a place, it's a part of the world I want to visit. They even reroute air traffic around this national park so that you can't hear any planes, because that was the last piece of part of noise that was disrupting this actual physical location, which is on the Pacific Northwest. But it's a cool concept, book, philosophy, et cetera, worth checking out.
Yeah, it's awesome. It is definitely easy to take on too much and to let yourself be drowned out. I totally hear that. And there's such a skill that's needed to focus in and like identify what is the one most important thing that you should actually be working on, and forget about all the rest. I'm definitely going to check out. I haven't read that, so I'm definitely going to check that out. onesquareinch.com. That's awesome.
.org.
Oh, .org. Okay. Cool. Thank you very much, Elliot. For everybody watching, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Swish Money Live. We're going to have a lot of these types of discussions with a lot of great guests over the course of the next couple months. So definitely check us out. Elliot, thank you so much. And please, let's come back on again in a little while, and we'll talk about this again. I feel like we're only scratching the surface of some of this stuff.
We certainly are. So happy to do so. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a good one.